Hello and welcome along to the Vagus Nerve Masterclass. My name is Jessica Maguire and we've got quite a few people already who've jumped on the call, and I can still see many of you are signing in. So welcome. I always love to hear from you first. So if you feel comfortable sharing, I would love to hear where it is that you are. So if you want to type into the chat box where you're calling in from, feel free. So we've got Los Angeles, Seattle. Oh, this is flying through. Orange, Sydney, New York, Melbourne, Tennessee, California, Brisbane, New York City. Whew, it's going very fast. Portugal, Jamaica, New Zealand, San Diego, Tokyo, Melbourne. Wow, we've got people here from all over the world, which makes me very excited. Vancouver, Tasmania, Austin, Texas, Blue Mountains, Nashville, Tennessee. Fantastic. So I'd love to introduce you now to our panelist, Tess, who is coming on, but I can't see her video as yet. But she is here as well and will be handling your questions. So she is our event concierge, and she's here to make sure that you get the most out of the program.
I'm here, Jess. I just need you to turn on my video.
Okay, no problem.
Keep setting.
So the other thing that we love to hear from is what it is that you want to get out of the masterclass. So what's the main thing that you would love to walk away from today knowing? And feel free to type that into the chat box as well, because it really helps us to make sure that what we're sharing with you is meeting those objectives. So I've got practical exercises for clients, how to heal my gut, strategies to regulate, self-regulation, the science, hormonal healing, how to regulate, practices for anxiety, self-regulation, reduce stress, actionable steps, PTSD and autoimmune. Excellent. Wonderful. Okay, so lots and lots of those, and we'll revisit those in a minute. I'll just get Tess to put together what the main ones are, and we'll come back and visit those. And just before I pop us into screen share, I'm going to introduce myself. So my name's Jessica, and my work is helping people improve the functioning of their nervous system. And so I've worked for many years as a physiotherapist in clinical practice, helping people with chronic health conditions, whether that's in the body with physical pain, or it could be gut issues and things like that, but also how that connects in with our psychological health. And the science is showing that we can't separate the brain and the body. They're so connected, and that's really what led me to put together this masterclass, which was first of all for my patients in clinic. We had our workshops, and then over time we've taken these to reach people everywhere because so many people are interested in learning more, which is wonderful. So I'm really looking forward to sharing this information with you today. And what I love to do is give people the skills and the resources to feel that they are back in the driver's seat with their own nervous system. So rather than feeling like these things are happening to us, we feel like, okay, this is what's going on. I understand it. It makes sense. And these are all the tools that I have to help bring that regulation back to my nervous system. So that resilience comes from having more resources to cope than the stresses that you're facing. And that's exactly what you're going to walk away with from this masterclass, is a toolkit of practices and a framework to understand your own nervous system. So I'm going to pop us into screen share. And then you will be able to see our little presentation for today. And we will go. Okay. So here we go. Vagus Nerve Masterclass for physical, emotional, and digestive health. So just a few logistics, which will really help for today and help you get the most out of today. What we're going to take you through is informative teaching. So there'll be lots on the science side, as well as interactive exercises. So our regulation tools. Now, this work can be very therapeutic and healing, but it's not psychotherapy. So if you're working with someone, I'd encourage you to keep doing that, but this can be a wonderful add-on to your what you're doing at the moment. And we also invite you to honor your body and your nervous system. So as you go through this, if it feels like too much, just take a break. You're going to receive a recording of today's presentation, and you'll also receive all the practices again. So often it's better to take a slow approach and have the change be more sustained than to overwhelm your nervous system. Now, if dysregulation is present, so you do the practices and you feel a little bit overwhelmed, then it's co-regulation can be great. So this means you might try the practices with a therapist, another health professional, even with a partner or a friend, but someone who's grounded and someone that you feel safe and connected with. And you'll receive an email with video and the audios as well. So I'm just going to pass over to Tess, who's going to explain how the Q&A section works, because she is in charge of all your questions and the Q&A part at the end.
Hi guys, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Jess?
Yes, can hear you.
Cool. I think maybe if you start my video, they might be able to see me too, but it might be a setting we set up wrong. But hello everyone, I'm Tess. Sorry you can't see my lovely face, but I'll see you soon, I'm sure. We just asked that if you wouldn't mind grabbing a piece of paper, you might need it to write down things during the call anyway. So you can also jot down any questions that pop up there, because if you type your questions into the box while Jess is presenting, she gets a little red urgent symbol and it tends to distract her a bit from presenting to you guys. So we just ask you to hold on to your questions until the end, if you don't mind. If there's questions that come through in the Q&A box, you might see me answer them during the call, if they're things that I can answer. If not, I'll collate them and we'll present them to Jess at the end. We just want to remind you that in this group setting, we can't give individual medical advice. So yeah, just to keep your questions specific to the content of the class.
Sorry, Tess, that just jumped forward. There you go. Sorry.
All right. And if the question pops up and it has already been answered in the call, then we might just refer you to where to see the answer, because that's going to be the most comprehensive answer to it anyway. And then you can watch it back in the recording. But it's really exciting to see so many of you on with us live and from all around the world. It's really cool. I'm really loving as well seeing the things that you guys are hoping to get out of the course today. All seem really possible, like education and tools to help with self-regulation and help with gut issues. Also confirmation I'm not crazy. Love that. How to rewire what is trapped and held in my nervous system. And there's some helpful regulation strategies when supporting clients with complex trauma. Yeah, so there's some really, really exciting things that tools to not disassociate. Yeah, so I think, Jess, you're gonna be able to help lots of these people. I'll pass back over to you and I'll keep my eye on the chat.
Thank you very much, Tess. So Tess is there to help you get the most out of the masterclass today. Now, let's dive on in to our objectives. So by the end of the masterclass, these are all the things that you're going to have achieved. So through the masterclass, we give you a framework of understanding of the different responses of your nervous system so that you can learn to engage with it rather than being overwhelmed by emotions and physical sensations. We teach you the areas of the brain impacted when it comes to stress and trauma, and also the role of the vagus nerve. So you'll learn why neuroplasticity means you can reshape them both. You'll learn and practice a sequence of trauma-sensitive self-regulation exercises that you can continue to use independently. So you'll know what tool to use when. And that's the biggest thing. So lots of people say, what's the one best technique to activate the vagus nerve? And the truth is there isn't one. It's really about what attunes to your nervous system, depending on the state that you're in. And this is why we need to understand the different states of our nervous system and then have a variety of tools that we can use for each of those states. And because we're all different things attune to each of us in different given moments. If it was as simple as saying, here's one exercise, well, we wouldn't need this whole masterclass. But what I want you to understand is by learning to build this awareness of your nervous system, you become very resilient once you have this confidence in knowing what tools are going to help bring regulation. So we're going to also look at how a dysregulated nervous system can lead to chronic health conditions, and most importantly, how you can re-regulate it. We're going to look at how to build, as we've said several times, self-regulation and resilience. And this will mean your nervous system is more flexible and adaptable when you face stresses. So looking at the anatomy of the vagus nerve, and I love to do this because it really helps you understand its function. So if we look at these two yellow lines there coming down either side at the top, we would say that that's the vagus coming out from the brainstem down to the sides of the neck. We know it's got some branches up to the ears, but a lot of those yellow fibers are coming down into the chest area. They're going to the heart and also the lungs. So we can see that that plays a big role in our heartbeats per minute and also our breathing. But we can also see those little fibers there going just underneath the diaphragm. So sitting under the heart, we can see that line and that connective tissue. And under that is more parts of the vagus nerve that's going to the gut. So we can see that our digestion is affected. But the vagus isn't actually one nerve. We'd say it's a plexus or many branches that come together that make up the vagus. So that's why it has such a big impact on us. It starts off in the brainstem, which if you popped your hand on the back of your skull, down where it connects with the neck, you can feel a bit of a ridge there. So deep within there, we have the brainstem. It exits from there, coming down into the neck. We can see the branches to the lungs, the heart, down into the gut, and we can see that connection to so many parts of our viscera or visceral organs. So Charles Darwin said a long, long time ago that he knew there was this two-way connectivity between what he thought was the brain and the heart. He didn't really talk so much about the gut. And from that time, we've had an influence where we've looked at the brain being more like a control over the body, or like more dominant over the body. But what the science is showing now is that that's not really the case. We have a bi-directional communication happening. So what's happening in the body also influences the brain. And the vagus nerve gets its name because in Latin it means wandering nerve. It's so big and covers such a vast area. We could compare it in size to the spinal cord. And for those of you who love your anatomy, there's a little bit of information there for you on that. So why is it so important? We hear a lot about the vagus. Well, it really is that epicenter of the mind-body connection. So we can't separate the brain and the body. If we look at how things like pain happen, it happens in both. So when we look at the gut microbiome, we're seeing that psychological health is reflected in the state of our gut. This is something we'll talk about as well. And it controls what's known as our autonomic nervous system. Now, if you've never heard of the autonomic nervous system, that is absolutely fine. We will cover that and you'll understand by the end of the masterclass. But the main thing to look at here is that a healthy nervous system is not always calm. So it's okay to get stressed. In fact, if we get stressed and can recover fully from it, we are actually more resilient and more adaptable. But we want to learn how we can do that. So once we learn to engage the vagus nerve, we see that it slows our physiology back down from stress, and it's the key to help us recover from it. So it's what makes us flexible and resilient. It's the communicator from the heart and the brain and the gut and the brain, and it impacts on digestion and even intuition, or understanding to tune into sensations in the body and what they're telling us. And we can look at the vagus nerve as our inbuilt anti-inflammatory, because it actually helps to bring balance to the pro-inflammation part of our immune system and our anti-inflammation part. And so this is why it's so important when it comes to chronic health. So for example, if the vagus nerve isn't working well, we can have an increase in the pro-inflammatory parts of our immune system, leading to inflammation. And this can be a pathway to causing things like chronic pain, immune issues. It can even affect our hormonal system as well. So 80 to 90% of the fibers of the vagus nerve are what we call afferent or sensory. So they're running upwards from the body to the brain. And it's only a very small number of the fibers that are running down into the body from the brain. This means we have the ability to tap into those fibers that are traveling from the body up to the brain. And that's what most of your practices from today are going to be about. So we can do this from the enteric nervous system, or the gut, or the belly brain. We can do this by tapping into heart rate variability. We can look at breath. We can look at posture, facial expression, or linked to what's called the social engagement system, which we're going to talk about. But that bottom-up information is what communicates with the survival brain, or the lower centers of the brain, where we change the states of our nervous system by what's happening there. So these practices are really effective in times of stress or in the heat of the moment. It's difficult to sometimes think our way out of stress because of the way our anatomy is. And we'll go through this in a moment. But what we're going to start with is looking at posture today. And the nervous system responds quite profoundly to that. And that's for many different reasons. But one of the main ones is to do with the shifts in blood pressure receptors, known as baroreceptors, which send messages up to the brainstem to either increase the activity of the vagus nerve, which slows our physiology down, or to inhibit the vagus nerve, which increases our heart rate and blood pressure. So Something that's really useful is to check in with your posture several times per day and to find sometimes a more optimal state. So for all of the practices today, it really helps if you can get to know the baseline of your mind and the baseline of your body. So what that means is if you take out a piece of paper and your pen, and we'll jot these down, but this is really useful to continue to use as you go through the practices today and into the future. So it helps if you can take a baseline of your mind first so that you can become a scientist with your own nervous system. So from a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being slow thoughts, you might feel vague, spacey. You might be finding it hard to stay focused because you keep going into sort of a dreamlike state. And 10 being racing thoughts, going from one to the next really quickly. But 5 being the optimal state, where you might find that your thoughts are drifting a little bit, but overall, you're able to concentrate on what's being presented here. So you might feel alert, but still relaxed enough. Where would you be on that scale? So writing it down on your piece of paper, and it's okay if you're not 100% sure, you can just take a guess. You can always come back to this in time. But for today, just popping that down on a piece of paper. And then we can do the same with the body's energy level. So from a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is you're feeling extreme exhaustion and fatigue, it would be difficult for you to stand up out of your chair or from wherever it is that you're sitting. And 10 represents extreme restlessness, hyperactivity, and that you're struggling to sit still. Where would you be on that baseline? So writing that down on your piece of paper, I'm going to use these in a moment. So for our first posture, we're going to use bottom-up regulation. Now, this will make sense as we get to the practice, but if you're closer to a 1 with the baseline of your body, so we're going to go with what the baseline of your body is, what I'm going to invite you to do is add a little push when we get to your contact points. So we'd say 1 is down here, and if we're down here, we want to up-regulate our nervous system. So we want to come up to here. Now, if you're closer to a 10, then we want to, oh, my 0, we want to down-regulate your nervous system. So we want to come back closer to a 5. And with this part, you're going to relax or soften the contact point to down-regulate your nervous system. And as I said, we are going to work with the baseline of your body. So using that to pick where you are, and whether you're closer to a 10, you're going to soften your contact point, closer to a 1, you're going to add a little push with your contact point. So just having that in mind. But what we're going to do is focus our attention on the contact point. And this is the way that we bring our survival brain into a more balanced state. So these lower sections of the brain down here, particularly this red section here, the amygdala. So we'd say this is our survival brain. Okay, so it's deep down, and it's how we detect if we feel safe, dangerous, or life-threatening. So this happens outside of conscious awareness. We can see the squiggly parts of the brain around the outside there. That's the thinking brain. And as the name suggests, that's where we have thoughts, it's where we have our planning, our reasoning, our logic, which is all very useful. But when it comes to stress, it's the amygdala's job to move us between the different states. And this is why it's difficult to outthink our feelings when we're triggered. because the amygdala doesn't communicate with us through thinking. It communicates with us when we come into the body more so. So what we're going to do for this practice, for our contact points, is, as I said, work with the amygdala to bring regulation to it. And it really helps you to engage the vagus nerve as well, because we're working on posture. So for this practice, it's best if you can sit in a way so that you have your back against a chair or a wall and you feel supported. And so that in the way that you're sitting, if your hips can be slightly higher than your knees, you'll get a sense that your spine is lengthened. So if we're really slumped, it tends to drop us down and not feel so good. And if we're really tense with tension, it tends to drive our nervous system up. So we want to come into this posture where we can feel both alert and relaxed. And it's useful if you can have your legs uncrossed and your feet flat on the floor. And it's up to you with these practices if you want to do them with your eyes open or closed. We're going to direct our attention now to the bottom of our feet touching the floor. And noticing the contact points on the outer part of the feet, so the soles of the feet. And you might notice the floor itself. So it might be tiles or carpet or a rug. You might notice material of a sock or a shoe. But just see if you can direct your attention, even if your mind drifts off, that's okay, just to take in those sensations at the bottom surface of your feet. Now, if you were closer to a 10 with the baseline of your body, just notice what happens when you relax your feet into the floor, as though you could imagine them softening or melting. And there was just that sense that the floor could support you. If you're closer to a 1 with the baseline of your body, you might gently press the feet into the floor. So you're up regulating your energy or your nervous system. Very gently pressing into the floor. And just noticing what happens as you do that. And then moving on to the next contact point, which is the back of your legs and your sitting bones, or the base of your pelvis touching the floor, either the chair or the floor, depending on where you're sitting. So just notice the sensory information. So maybe there's areas of pressure from the chair. Maybe you notice material of your clothing or the chair. And we're just directing attention to these points, even if the mind does wander off a bit, just gently guiding it back to that sensory information. And if you're closer to a 10 with the baseline of your body, can you just let those contact points soften a little bit into the chair or the floor? So you almost get the sense that you're being supported. If you're closer to a 1 out of 10, you could try pressing a little bit with the back of the legs into the chair. Sometimes when you're in that state where you're down closer to a 1, you might find it hard to feel your body or pay attention to sensations. So you could just try rubbing the legs a little bit to help you connect to your body as you take in sensations. And remember, it's totally normal if your mind drifts off at any stage. Just come back to the practice and working on either up-regulating or down-regulating your nervous system. And then tuning into the next contact point of your spine, touching either the back of the chair or touching the wall. And just paying attention to whichever vertebrae you feel is in contact with the chair. So there might be sensations of pressure, or you might notice again your clothing touching that area of your skin. Just being curious about what you notice through the contact points of your spine. And if you're closer to a 10, we want to give your nervous system that sense of support and stability. So you can very gently try letting your spine just relax back a little bit into the chair. Just notice what it's like to feel supported by the back of your chair as you continue to take in that sensory information. If your baseline was closer to a 1, see if you can add a little bit of length to your spine to help up-regulate your nervous system. So sometimes if you gently press the feet into the floor, you get a sense of just growing a little bit taller. And when you add that little bit more length through the spine, you will get an up-regulation of your nervous system. Just experimenting and noticing what happens. The final contact point are your hands. So you can pay attention to the hands touching each other or touching your lap. Just noticing whatever's touching the skin. So you might feel warmth from your hands or your lap. areas of pressure or coolness. And again, if you're closer to a 10, you might soften the contact points. Let the hands be relaxed. As you take in that sensory information. Or if you're closer to a 1, to upregulate, you might gently press the hands into each other or into your lap. And just continuing to take in that sensory information of the hands. And then noticing what the baseline of your body is like now. So if we said that 1 was feeling fatigued and exhausted, difficult to stand up if you wanted to, and 10 was feeling restless, agitated, hyperactive, you're having difficulty sitting still, what would the baseline of your body be now? Just writing that down on a piece of paper if you wish to. And then tuning into the baseline of your mind. So what are your thoughts like now? So if we said a 1 out of 10 was feeling vague and spacing, you were having difficulty staying focused on this practice, and 10 was your thoughts were racing from one to the next and the next and looping over and over. But 5 was somewhere in the middle where, yes, your mind drifted off sometimes, but you could still come back and do the practice. Might like to jot down what the baseline of your mind is. And if you feel comfortable, it's very interesting to see what changes you get. So if you want to type into the chat box what changes you noticed. So you might put the original baseline of your mind and the baseline of your mind after doing this practice, the baseline of your body before doing this practice, and the baseline afterwards. And I'll give you a moment just to type those in, and then I'll get Tess to read some of those out to so we can learn from each other.
Fantastic. And while you guys are typing those in, I'm just going to ask you again, if I could ask you to refrain from chatting to each other in the chat box during the presentation, and also sending questions through in the chat box during the presentation. I've had lots of people send me a message in the Q&A saying they're finding it really distracting. So yeah, if you could try and refrain from commenting on what's happening for you until Jess asks you to in times like this. And just write down on your piece of paper what's happening for you or any questions that arise, and we'll try our hardest to get to those at the end. But I can see a few things come through, which is great. So you've got, I was a 3, now a 4. I feel less lethargic. It's great. Jen is saying she feels worse, but my body was below 5 and my mind was above, so all felt off. That can happen sometimes. I know Jess talks about, particularly when we're first developing autonomic awareness, it can feel challenging in the body. Amanda says she's got more clarity for sure. Was a 3, now a 4 or 4.5. Body before was an 8 before, a 5 now. Mind was an 8 and a 5 now. That's awesome. Me too, feel a bit more alert from a 4 to a 5. Feeling slightly more energy. Was initially at a 3 for body, but now I'm super jittery at a 10. It's really ramped up the energy there. Feel much more relaxed and present. It's awesome. Paris is feeling more grounded through her feet and able to sit in the chair without feeling like I need to get up constantly. Courtney said, I tested to see if I could down regulate and feel much more relaxed. It's awesome. Yeah, there's some really interesting numbers coming through. My vision is a little clearer. I'm able to focus more. So we can see just by this short practice, when we stay in it, we can really have some amazing change.
Thank you, Tess. That's wonderful. And thank you for passing that on about the chat box Q&A. Yeah, that would be really useful, guys, if we can just hold off to the end. I know it's exciting and I do love hearing from you, but it's easy to get distracted, and the content we're sharing is quite in depth. So as Tess said, we'd love it if you could save your questions to the end. So just a couple of points to make from what we shared there. There was someone who said they started at a 5 and then it didn't actually help them feel better. So sometimes the practice doesn't attune with our nervous system. So it means that it wasn't the right practice. So say if you tried the sympathetic contact points and you relaxed, then I would try doing this the other way around for you and see how that changes. And somebody commented that they went up with the intensity of their activation. So sometimes if we start coming into the body and we have stress arousal that we pay attention to, it can actually activate survival responses. So in that instance, I'd invite you to try going for a brisk walk for 10 minutes and then coming back and trying this again. So you discharge that stress activation. And then often what you find is you'll really come into that place where you discharge the energy, and you might notice that you start yawning or you get a warmth, like a sense of relief in the body, and the breath becomes full again. So a couple of things to try with that, but give it a try again and another time and see what results you get. Okay, let's move on to vagal tone. So just like a muscle, when the vagus nerve is working well, it has good, we say it's got good tone. When the vagus is working really well as well, we say that has higher vagal tone. And it's really a key biological correlate to psychological well-being. So what it means is that if we have higher vagal tone, when we face stresses, we actually recover faster from them. And this can be seen when we look at things like people's heart rate, when we look at monitoring their skin for sweat, or even looking at cortisol levels. But lower vagal tone, these are some of the signs. Now, if you have one of these, it's not really conclusive to saying, yes, I have low vagal tone. It's normally a cluster of these things. So it can be things like anxiety, fear, emotional overwhelm, and having difficulty switching off. But what I would say is if that's for a prolonged period. It can also be if we have prolonged periods of feeling depressed, flat, stuck, or lacking motivation. If we have digestive issues like irritable bowel syndrome, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, if we have pain, if we have constipation, and if we have bloating. Having chronic pain, aches, or muscle tension is often part of having low vagal tone. And we'd also see it with autoimmune issues like rheumatoid arthritis. If we have insomnia often, long-term fatigue, and chronic inflammation. So we're looking, as I said, at a cluster of those things. So how do things go wrong? How do we end up with lower vagal tone? Stress puts the nervous system into overdrive, and it will search for the signals it receives from the vagus nerve. So we get changes in what's called neuroception, interoception, and exteroception. And don't worry if they sound like another language, we are going to talk about these as well. So what we might look at as traumatic stress is when we feel helpless or powerless. So we can look at stress and trauma on a continuum. And it's not necessary that it's just got to be a one-time episode of, being in a disaster or something like that, or a horrific accident. It can also be when the stress is chronic. So it could be a business where we feel prolonged stress about our finances. It can be oppression. It can be a terrible relationship. But COVID is one of the main things that we can see is activating our survival brain, because in a lot of that, we may have felt helpless with lockdowns, it's uncertainty, and also the survival brain tends to be respond with more stress when something's novel or we've never experienced something like that before. And COVID ticks all of those boxes. So a lot of people following on from the stress of that, we could say, might have lower vagal tone than what they had prior to the pandemic. And following periods of chronic and traumatic stress, our nervous system begins to think that the danger zone, or where we've got our survival responses turned on, like fight, flight, or freeze, is the normal state. And we don't come back to the state where rest, rejuvenation, repair, and healthy digestion happen. And that's why we can end up with chronic illnesses. So stress and trauma are not really a psychological thing that we can think our way out of or just be more positive. They're really changes in our physiology. So all of our systems, like our immune system, endocrine system, and our digestion, as well as the nervous system. We don't come back to a baseline, like from the stress happening, and then we have an increase in our stress response, and then we come back down to an equilibrium. It tends to be that our stress responses stay turned on. And we can assess the vagus nerve by looking at higher heart rate variability. Now, a lot of people ask what devices are there that can help. To my knowledge, the best is still using an ECG, so hooking up electrodes onto the heart and studying it that way. That's the gold standard, most accurate way. But there is technology being developed, but the science isn't really consistent with any one product that I've seen as yet, although I'm sure it will come on the market soon. In saying that, it's not necessary to measure heart rate variability to know that you have lower vagal tone, and I'll explain more as we go. But what they showed with many studies was that when heart rate variability was lower, it meant that there would be dysregulation carrying on. So if we have a look at this picture here, it's really helpful to get an understanding of why our heart and our vagus nerve go together. When we breathe in, or on our inspiration, our heart actually beats faster. And when we breathe out, our heart actually beats slower. So if we have a look at this picture, the little red lines down the bottom, that's the heart, it's one beat for each little graph that you can see there, or the ECG. And so in that first section, we would say that the heart is beating faster here, and this would be the in breath. And so we see this blue line come up as the heart beats faster. And then as we breathe out, we can see that those lines are further apart. And so that blue line is coming down because it's not beating as fast. And the way to think about this is what we call the vagal brake. So the vagal brake runs from the brainstem down to the sinoatrial node of the heart. So it controls the heart's pacemaker. Now, if you imagine that if you're riding a bicycle downhill, you would keep a little bit of the brake engaged with your hand on the brake there, just so you didn't go too fast. So the vagus nerve, or the vagal brake, is always doing that to our heart. It's just inhibiting it a little bit. When we breathe in, it just relaxes a fraction. So the heart speeds up. And then when we breathe out, it re-engages. This is really healthy. It's a finely tuned mechanism so that say we needed to focus on something, like say I'm giving you this presentation, I will have a little bit of the vagal brake released, and that gives me more energy and focus. I want that. It means that I'm going to be able to concentrate. I'm going to be able to deliver this to you with the passion that I feel for it. Now, when we know that, so say after I've done this, then I would, if my vagus nerve or vagal brake's working healthy, it will re-engage and I will calm back down to that baseline. What we know that happens following chronic and traumatic stress is that the vagal brake is slightly off all the time. So it's not having that inhibitory effect on our heart. So if you imagine then, when I go to face a challenge, and I've already got the brake off a little bit, let's say it comes then right off, and I'm going to move into fight or flight and have a full stress response with adrenaline. Now, the good news is we can actually influence the vagal brake, and we can, over time with practice, get it to work healthy to be this finely tuned mechanism. So if we look at that top picture, that is what somebody with lower vagal tone or low heart rate variability would look like. So although overall we're seeing big changes, between each breath, it's very small changes. So that means that the brake is already off a little bit because we're not getting that inhibition with the breath out to slow it back down. But that second picture, we're seeing that lovely big curve, which is showing the difference between the breath in and breath out, and the vagus nerve is functioning well. So what we see with a lower heart rate variability is that we move into fight, flight, freeze quicker, and it takes us longer to recover from a stressful event. With higher heart rate variability, your nervous system has more flexibility and adaptability. So we can influence that vagal brake, which is a really wonderful thing. And that's a big part of making our nervous system healthy. So we don't want to be calm all the time. That's not really how it is. If there's something that I'm really passionate about and I can let off some of that vagal brake and let energy in to face that, and then I can re-engage it quickly, that's what makes a healthy nervous system. So I'm just going to get my arrow back. When we have our healthy heart rate variability, like the blue picture we saw with those big oscillations, we actually have better functioning of the other systems. So this is our cardiovascular system, blood pressure, respiration or breathing, our immune system, and our endocrine system or our hormonal system. So when you learn to recover fully from a stressful event and increase vagal tone, many chronic health conditions can improve too. And these are just some little questions for you to have a think about, which are when you think back to something that was recently stressful for you, and it doesn't need to be anything that's, a big stress, just something that you can bring to mind. How long did it take for you to return to a state of calm afterwards? Did that amount of fear or anxiety or stress match the situation? Am I often experiencing a sense of fear or worry, even when I know things are okay rationally? Do I get gastrointestinal issues or other physical sensations after stress? And do I experience insomnia in difficult times? Now, none of this is to judge yourself or feel bad. It's more to get curious about, okay, where's my nervous system at now? Because we can change it through what we teach it, and then it learns and adapts to something new. But getting an idea of where you're at now can be very useful. So to influence heart rate variability, we can use two techniques, 1-to-1 breathing and 1-to-2 breathing. Both of these are wonderful to regulate your nervous system. We're going to try 1-to-1 breathing today, and then you'll have 1-to-2 breathing in your resources that you receive. So what it means is with 1-to-1, the inhalation and the exhalation are equal. With 1-to-2 breathing, the exhalation is twice as long as the inhalation. Now, why this works so well is because when we breathe a little bit fuller and deeper, the lungs actually stretch. And these stretch receptors go up to the brainstem, and they actually help to engage the vagal brake. So this is why breathing techniques like this can be really useful to use to help bring in the vagal brake. What's been shown is that breathing at a rate of about 5.5 breaths per minute with the equal inhalation to exhalation increases heart rate variability. Okay, so around about 5.5. But what I'm going to say is work with what feels comfortable in your body, because remember, your posture or how the tension in the body is will be inhibiting or exciting the vagus nerve. So if you think about when you take a deep breath in, and if you see how these ones are coming in, these are accessory breathing muscles. Now, if I have a lot of tension in those, my vagus nerve is going to be inhibited. So whilst you're practicing these, just see if you can stay soft in the muscles in the neck, the shoulders, the chest, and the belly. Now, again, for this practice, it's useful to have a posture that will support you. So as we explained for the previous exercise, if you find that when you pay attention to your breath, it doesn't feel good, sometimes if you have if you're used to panic, paying attention to the breath can feel a little bit dysregulating. I'd invite you then to pay attention to the contact points of your feet on the floor, and then come back to the breath when you feel okay or when you feel more regulated. So we call that titration, where you practice the breath for a little while, but if you start to feel that you're moving away from that 5 out of 10 or around that, then just pay attention to the feet for a little while, and then you can come back to the breath that way. And you can move between those 2 points for a while. Again, it's useful to, well, it's up to you. You can do this practice with your eyes open or closed. But if you have your eyes open, it does help just to soften the gaze and look down so that your attention can come inwards. And this is a bit tricky when we do breathing exercises, but see if you can not change your breath to start with. So just noticing the breath wherever it's the easiest to feel or the sensations are the most pleasant. So that could mean you're feeling the breath at the nostrils. It might be the back of the throat. Maybe it's the chest. Or it might be the belly. And just to begin with, see if you can just observe the breath. Just being curious about what your breath is like. Allowing the body to breathe on its own as it does so many times per day. You're just noticing the in-breath first. You might notice how many counts it takes for you to breathe in. See if you could just count that. How many counts does it take for you to breathe in? And then noticing your out breath. How many counts does it take for you to breathe out? Noticing what is shorter then, or are they even already? So just to begin, if one part of the breath is shorter, whether that's the in-breath or the out-breath, is it possible to lengthen the shorter part by just one count? And if the in-breath and out-breath are even, just letting the breath be a little bit fuller, but staying in a rhythm that's comfortable and easy. And if you've now come into a pattern where the in-breath and the out-breath are even, just being curious about what that's like. Staying soft in the muscles on either side of the neck. Into the shoulders. Through the chest and the diaphragm. If this is comfortable enough for you and this is where you want to stay, then I'd invite you to honor your body's needs. Or you could try lengthening both the in-breath and the out-breath by one more count. And again, just being curious about what happens as you lengthen that again. So you can notice the baseline of your mind. You can notice the baseline of your body. Does this practice at this time bring you closer to regulation? And if not, that's okay. So you may like to write down on your piece of paper how this practice was for you, particularly noticing what the baseline of your body was before you started this practice, the baseline of your body afterwards. And also you can do the same with your mind as well. And as I said, we also have the 1 to 2 breathing practice, which you can use as well. And a note on those. Now, if you found that 1-to-1 breathing actually made you feel a little bit lower or flatter, or go down towards your 1, I wouldn't use 1 to 2 breathing just afterwards. 1 to 2 breathing is better if you've tried 1-to-1 breathing and you still feel that you're more higher with your regulation, or you have more anxiety. So start with one-to-one breathing when you're doing this yourself. And if you find it brings you closer to a 5, great. If you find that you're not getting an improvement and you're feeling quite anxious, then you can try the 1-to-2 breathing. All right, we're going to keep moving because I know that we're going to run out of time otherwise. But we'll move on to regulation, which is something you've probably heard me say heaps about already. And we've actually been doing it. So it'll make sense. But when we talk about regulation, it's our ability to manage our emotional state and to calm ourselves down during heightened emotion. Or, as we've done, bring yourself back up if you're feeling flat. So we can look at it in terms of emotional regulation, but we can also look at this as physiological regulation, which basically means that our physiology, so how our nervous system is working with all those other systems, how we bring it back to a healthy baseline. And when we practice this and we get that discharge of the stress arousal, we actually are shifting our regulation and recovering from chronic stress and trauma. So that's a wonderful thing. Our nervous system is dynamic, it's always learning, and what it learns the most through is by what it experiences. So in the heat of the moment, if you can show your survival brain that it's safe, for instance, by using the contact points of your feet, and you notice that your stress arousal comes back closer to a 5, that's regulation. And you've just taught your survival brain that it can handle stressful situations, and it learns and adapts. And the next time you face something stressful, you actually are going to be able to handle that better. So that's amazing, because it's through neuroplasticity that it can change. And often it changes from what we experience in our past. So we'll talk about that in a minute. But you do learn as a child how to regulate your emotions. Now, this comes from what you saw your parents do when they were stressed and under pressure, so what they modeled. And some people go, oh no, my parents weren't very good at that. But that is initially how we learn some of that. And we also learn from our attachment with our parents. So children and babies, they don't have the ability to self-regulate. So we don't come in with that part of our nervous system solidified yet. If we look at the part of the vagus nerve that helps to bring that regulation, it hasn't properly been formed yet. So we are dependent on our early caregivers to soothe us. Now, if you think about, say, a little girl who goes up to pat a dog and the dog knocks her over and it really scares her, she might run to her parent or caregiver, and the caregiver or parent picks her up and soothes her. So that then brings that regulation to her nervous system. And then the parent might take the toddler to the dog and teach her how to pat the dog without getting knocked over. And then she realizes, oh, okay, this is safe. I can handle this. And so that's how we learn from a survival point of view. We learn through experience. So we can create today things that or we can use these tools so that in the heat of the moment when we're stressed, we are able to become a securely attached friend to our own distressed self. And this is what can bring regulation. So hope lies in knowing that you can relearn regulation thanks to neuroplasticity. And all of these tools will help you. And many of you have said already how this has been helping, as we talked about with the contact points. So I spoke earlier about interoception as well, but this is the process by which we notice our internal state or sensations, such as emotions, hunger, pain, digestion, but it can also be our stress arousal. And some people call it our sixth sense or our gut instinct. And we can say that the enteric nervous system is one of the loudest, or where we get a lot of our information, which is our belly brain, but also the heart. It has its own intrinsic network of nerve cells, and that's what gives us feeling as well. So interoception is really important when it comes to regulation. So our nervous system is shaped by our past, and feelings that arise from nowhere can be part of our physiology from a past memory. So let's say the little girl with the dog, when she grows up and is an adult, she may have gone into felt anxiety each time she saw dogs as an adult if she didn't get that experience of soothing or calming or relearning that it was okay when she was around dogs. So she may not rationally know or have the memory of, oh, I'm not sure why I'm scared of dogs, but it can be her survival brain saying, oh, this is just like that time in the past. So that happens outside of our conscious awareness. Now, how interoception helps us is because if we can recognize, oh, I have stress activation here, and differentiate that between an old pattern or a trigger or something that's coming up and the accurate sensations of what's happening today that can guide you, it really helps to benefit our entire being because we bring back agency and control. So sometimes if we feel sensations and we've had dysregulation, we may cut off from feeling those. So we cut off from our body. Or on the other hand, sometimes we feel sensations of fear or nervousness and we get flooded by those emotions because we assume it's going to be just like that time in the past when something really bad happened. So we want to learn to pay attention to these sensations in the present moment, bring regulation, and that's what helps our nervous system recover. We don't even need to bring the exact memory into conscious awareness for this to happen. We can work in the body because our survival brain, remember, is happening in the lower parts, which are outside of conscious awareness. But those feelings that we can tune into when we feel regulated, that's really what gives us wisdom, and it helps us make good decisions, especially when we're feeling more grounded. But triggers will bring that fear and overwhelming or strong emotions that may make us become reactive. So when we can get better at paying attention to our sensations, it really helps us to make good decisions. So it's really normal for our nervous system to fluctuate. Okay, so I might have a day where I get to work, the traffic is bad, I open up my inbox and there's an email from my boss that says we need to talk. And so I get that increase. And then after I see my boss, they want to tell me that I did a great job. And so I tend to calm back down, and then I might go for a walk on the beach, have a little rest, and feel my nervous system or my stress arousal come back down again. So remember, we're not going to be calm all the time. It's normal to have these ups and downs. But what really helps us to understand our nervous system is the window of tolerance. And if you can take anything away from today, then this would be it. So the window of tolerance, if we look at that green section, that's where we're inside our window. Now, it doesn't mean that we always feel calm, but it means that we're flexible. So let's say if things don't quite go to plan, I still can come up with a plan B, or I can still get to where I need to go. I'm adaptable. My thoughts are still coherent. So my thoughts aren't so racing around and panicked that I can't make sense of them. And they're not so slow and sluggish that I can't think about what I need to do. My energy is stable. So I'm not erratic or chaotic with my energy, but I'm not rigid or shut down with my energy. So you can see that fluctuation throughout the day. And then we might move up into that first little bar there. Now, this is where I'm moving onto the edge of my window of tolerance. So let's say that's where my boss said we need to talk and I'm feeling a bit scared. In that time, I can use both co-regulation. So I might just call up my friend and say, oh my gosh, I got an email from my boss and they want to talk. And my friend just talks with me and that's enough to calm me back down a little bit. I might still feel nervous, but I'm not too hyped up. Or I use one of my practices. Maybe I use the contact points while I'm sitting at my desk for a minute and just do 30 seconds of that. And I feel myself come back down from that anxiety. Now, that can be one way we can go. Or if we look further along the window of tolerance there towards the right of that picture, we can see sadness. So let's say I see on social media that my friends have gone out on the weekend and I wasn't invited. And I feel a sense of sadness and loneliness. And I start to feel myself have this sense of shame and rejection, and I feel myself shutting down a little bit. So in this time, again, I could call a friend, or I could use a different practice, one that helps to bring me back up. The practices that I use are going to be different. It's about finding the practices that are tuned to our nervous system. And this is why there isn't just one practice we can use. Now, what happens following chronic and traumatic stress is that window of tolerance gets smaller. And this would happen, we'd say, when we have low vagal tone. So that same situation, if we come over here to anxiety, that was my email from my boss, has now moved me up into fight or flight, or the sympathetic nervous system. So I might feel strong anxiety or panic, hypervigilance, restlessness, aggression, depending on if I'm in the fight or the flight. I might find it very hard to sit still. I may find that my breathing has become shallow. I feel tension right through my body. And if we look at this person who has a smaller window than, say, this person, I'm spending a lot more time up into that red state there than before. On the other hand, if we take that same situation as not being invited to my friends, I've come down here into what we call the dorsal vagal state, or freeze. So, or we can, some people get the faint response too, but just to make it simple, we'll call it freeze today. So in this state, I feel a sense of shut down. So what that might look like is it might be fuzzy around, or the world seems smaller. I might find it hard to take in what people are saying to me. I might feel depressed. I might feel numb. So I'm not connected to my body. A sense of feeling very lethargic and fatigued. But as I said, it's almost like drawing down into ourselves, and a sense of shame. So in this case, this person isn't really spending that much time inside their window of tolerance. And what we know from not just the psychological effect that this is having on how we feel and the thoughts that we have, but also our physical health, is that when we spend a long period of time in the sympathetic state, in that red state, we're likely to have issues at the gut because we won't have our digestion functioning normally. We have changes to our immune system where we see at first a spike in the immune system and then it just drops. So this is why we can get sick when we've been stressed. And then down in that bottom section, this is if we spend a prolonged period of time in that freeze state, or what's also called the dorsal vagal state, we can end up with things like chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. So this is why coming back into the window first, having the tools to do that, will improve our psychological, emotional, and physical health. But each time we do that and we teach ourselves that we can handle stress, our window gets bigger. So you'll get an immediate relief when you find the right tool to match what state you're in. But over time, every time you practice, you're changing your nervous system, which is so incredible that you can widen that window again following chronic and traumatic stress. So interoception is one of the most important practices to help us come back inside our window of tolerance. And this creates an integration between the brain and the body, but it really connects to an area called the insula, which is what helps us regulate our nervous system and recover from stress. So this is an area that is connected with sensation. So I'm just going to go back a little bit. Let's say I'm throughout the day. This is a really simple example, but it's just to give you an idea. Let's say I'm not paying attention to what's going on inside my body. So sensations, emotions, energy, stress, arousal. And I work from 8 a.m. through to 2 p.m. and I haven't eaten anything. And then all of a sudden, I'm not just a little bit hungry, I'm really hangry. So I really need to eat. I have low blood sugar levels, but I didn't pay attention to the sensations telling me that I was hungry earlier on. If we can stay connected to what we're feeling and check in with that, we have the chance to take care of our needs. So let's say I noticed that I was at work where, let's say I'd had a lot of emails coming in and there was loads of work for me to do. Somebody else gave me more tasks. My anxiety went up. Somebody else gave me another task that went up. And then before I knew it, I was feeling so overwhelmed and anxious. But if I was able to tune into, I'm actually feeling the sense that this is a bit too much for me, I then have the power to delegate some of that, or to say, actually, I'm pretty snowed under at the moment and I can't take on this work for you. So the more attention we have, it gives us agency. So all of these techniques are part of the masterclass, and you're going to be receiving them either via video or via as audio recordings. But there's a practice that I love to do now where we actually go into paying attention to some of the sensations and use a few techniques that can help to bring a sense of regulation. So what we do is we pay attention to, or we bring to mind, a situation from a recent time that was, I'm going to say, mildly to moderately stressful. So it won't serve you so well for this practice to pick something that's traumatic. Just picking something where you notice that it brought up some stress. It could be something that's coming up. It could be a conversation you need to have with somebody, or it could be that you were running late to something in the last week and you notice that your stress arousal went up. And what we're going to do is let ourselves experience a little bit of that nervous system activation just to get a flavor of it and use our interoception skills. And what we're going to do is name the sensations, so mentally whisper them. So let's say I bring to mind that I had an appointment and I got held up in traffic, and then when I tried to park, there was no parking and I was already 10 minutes late. So I can feel the tension coming into my chest and shoulders. And then I might name the sensations by going, heat, tension, constriction. I'm going to try that. And then what we're going to do is work with those sensations a little bit in ways that bring in the vagus nerve and also calm down the survival brain. Now, Remember, if you feel overwhelmed by sensations at any point, you can go back to feeling your contact points of your feet on the floor. Okay, so it helps again to find that nice posture that we had for the other practices. So I'll give you a moment just to adjust. And you can do this again with eyes open or closed. It's up to you. And then just bringing to mind a time recently where you noticed you had some stress activation, something on the mild to moderate level. And you might let that play like a movie in your mind. So just noticing where you were, who you were with, and pausing on the scene that brings up that sense of activation in your nervous system. And just be curious about what you're noticing in the body. What sensations are there? If it helps, you might take a hand and place it where you feel the sensations the most, just so you can connect to this part. And often when there's unpleasant sensations, we want to resist them or push them away. But this can drive our nervous system. So is it possible, just as we do this practice, to allow the sensations? Remember, you can always take a break if you need to. Just see if you can allow the sensations and then begin to mentally whisper what they are. So as you allow and mentally whisper what the sensations are, just being curious about how they change. And then pausing at the place in the body where the sensations feel the most sensitive or you feel the most vulnerable, and just asking to this place like you would with a friend that you care about, what is it that you most need right now? What is it that you most need right now? So it might be safety, presence, care, kindness, soothing. Just see if there's a word. And just like you might offer to that friend or somebody that you care about what it is that they ask for, is it possible for you to give that to this place. So you can place your hand there and get a sense of warmth or care traveling into the body. Just be curious if that helps to bring a sense of ease or soothing or regulation. Or you might try offering words, such as "it's okay, I'm here, I care about this suffering, you're safe." Just experimenting with what attunes to your nervous system with either touch or with words. You might imagine this place as a child or somebody that you care about. So you're offering that same care that you would give to others to this place. And then being curious about what it was that attuned to your nervous system. So was it that when you named sensations, you felt a sense of regulation? When you allowed whatever wanted to arise to be there? Was it when you offered touch or care? Or was it when you offered words to this place? And this can be helpful to write down for yourself on your piece of paper to start to build that autonomic awareness about what attunes to your nervous system. And once you've had a little write down of that, just to help discharge any stress activation, we might just do a little bit of shaking here with the arms. You can stand up and do it if you feel like you need to just get rid of some of that stress activation, shaking through the shoulders, the arms, or if you're standing up, you can do shaking through the legs. Whew. Or even if you just need to stand up and have a stretch or do some squats, we've still got a little bit to cover. You guys are doing a great job. I know this is a lot of information, but if you can have a little move around and help to keep yourself focused as we're on the home straight, that will be wonderful. Okay, moving on. So with that practice, what we used is where we name it to tame it. And that engages the vagus nerve, especially when we bring care to those sensations in the body. Now, if you remember where we looked at the survival brain, which is lower down in the brain, when we're stressed, we activate that part of the brain. And the way that it communicates with us is releasing hormones and neurotransmitters, which can create strong sensations into the body. So that's why it's helpful to work with the sensations in the body. Well, this is why interoception can be such a great way to regulate the nervous system. Compassion techniques have been shown to be one of the best ways to regulate the nervous system. So bringing that kindness, attuning to what's there and offering the care. Attunement is really important. So if you imagine that you were talking to somebody about this situation that you just went through and you felt really maybe scared or hurt or sad, and you'd really talked about that and touched into your feelings, and somebody just said, "You'll be right, let's get on with it." That's a lack of attunement and it feels yucky in the body. So it can make the nervous system increase survival responses and move towards protection. When we attune to what we're feeling, or people that attune to what we're feeling, which is called co-regulation, we will get a shift in our nervous system that helps move us inside the window of tolerance. Now, the other thing that works really well is that we engage the medial prefrontal cortex. Now, that sounds really fancy, but it's a part of the brain behind your eyes that can down-regulate the survival brain. So if you bring your hand up like this and you tuck your thumb in, we could say that this lower section here is the survival brain. Now, when we have this section over the top here, that's the thinking brain, and the knuckles there, right behind the eyes, that's the medial prefrontal cortex. When you name those sensations, you're engaging the prefrontal cortex, which actually, through top-down regulation, calms down the amygdala. Following chronic and traumatic stress, that connection can get interrupted. And so when we're stressed, we may flip our lid. Okay, so we lose sight of the bigger picture, we react in ways we don't want to. But when we name and allow sensations, we are regulating our nervous system too. So that's a very powerful technique to use. Now, we talked about interoception, inside, exteroception, outside. That's our sight, hearing, taste, smell, and it's our paying attention systems. So safety isn't really a cognitive experience. What's happening outside of us can trigger us into thinking that this is just like a time from the past. So for example, a veteran who may have post-traumatic stress disorder may hear a door slam and immediately think that it's a rifle. And that's because of changes to that system communicating with the survival brain. And they would move outside of their window of tolerance to deal with that. Now, when we talk about neuroception describes how neural circuits, mostly in the survival brain, distinguish whether situations or people are safe, dangerous, or life-threatening. So interoception, what we're feeling, exteroception, what's going on around outside of us, inform neuroception. So I like to think of neuroception like an alarm system. And let's say it's the alarm system for a house. And when the alarm would go off, which would be the amygdala, if somebody came into the house. But let's say we'd been broken into, so we set up a super duper sensitive alarm system. But let's say then it started going off just when the wind was blowing. So we would say that that alarm system is overprotective. Now, this is the same thing that can happen with our own neuroception following chronic and traumatic stress, because what's happened in our past and the memories that are stored deep into the survival brain will influence how we respond in the future. So we store the memories that are the most emotional or the strongest emotional experiences into the survival brain, and they influence us outside of our conscious awareness. So they're implicit memories, which means learning implicitly means it's the same as when you learn to ride a bike. So say you know how to ride the bike unconsciously. You don't need to think about it. You can just jump on the bike and off you go. But when I say to you, can you remember it? And you bring to mind the image of yourself riding the bike with, say, your sibling or a parent, that's an explicit memory which is happening in the thinking brain. So what this means is it's not our fault how we move between the different states of our nervous system. It's simply responding by what it learned from highly emotional experiences. And as I said, it's like the alarm can get overprotective. But just like doing these practices we can actually recalibrate that system so it's not so sensitive and the alarms don't go off when there's no threat. And that again helps to make us flexible and adaptable and will improve our physical and psychological health. So moving on. Now, this picture is really useful. It's another model of the window of tolerance, but it's a little bit different. But the green would be the same as being inside your window. Now, in the green state, we say that our social engagement system is active. And this is a branch of the vagus nerve that connects from our heart up to our face, or the cranial nerves that innervate the expression of our face and also speech. So this is really fascinating stuff, because when I'm in my green state, you'll hear my voice has high vocal prosody, which means changes in pitch and rhythm. Now, we think being calm means talking in a soft, whispery voice like this, but what's actually showing to be true is that when our social engagement system is active, there's a lot of prosody. And parents intuitively will do this with their babies. They'll start talking in this sing-song voice, which brings co-regulation. So that's quite amazing. So even if you were at a party and you were really connecting with somebody, your voice would have this, but the muscles of your middle ear would be primed to detect the sounds of mid-frequency, in the mid-frequency range. So that is the sound of the human voice. When we're in this state, we'll also see that there's activation at the muscles, or there'll be those wrinkles in the corner of the eyes. So orbicularis oculi are the muscles around the eyes. When we're in our social engagement system and the vagus nerve is working well, we'll see those lines around the outer part of the face. So it's like somebody smiling with their eyes. Now, all of these signals, if we're communicating with somebody who also has vocal prosody, they are listening to us, we're taking turns in talking, and there's also that smiling with our eyes, we're co-regulating each other. And when I'm in this state, I'll have oxytocin, the hormone oxytocin, released at the heart. My digestion is optimal, my immune system's working at its best, and so is my hormonal system. Now, let's say I face a stressor. I would then move up into the yellow state. And this is our mobilization system. So what this means is my nervous system mobilizes me to either run away from what's going on or to fight what's going on. And so I feel that I would have an activation through my shoulders or through my legs. I'm finding it hard to be still if I'm in this state. And we lose access to the social engagement system. So that branch of the vagus nerve is slightly inhibited. What we'll notice is that somebody's voice will change. They're no longer having that prosody, and the voice will become more monotone. So they might sound very angry like this, or they might express it with taking several breaths in between each word. And that's to do with the loss of that vagal engagement. We'll see that a person in this state finds it very difficult to listen to mid-frequency sounds or the sound of the human voice. The muscles of their middle ear change so that it changes the eardrum so that we hear low frequency sounds, which are predator sounds. Now, it makes sense when we look at it from an evolutionary point of view. We had to hear either the lion or the tiger in the bushes. And so our physiology is changing to adapt to that. And we'll also lose that expression of the upper face. So there might just be a little smile with the lower mouth, or there may be no expression at all. And that would tell us there's just a flat face. If I couldn't deal with the stressor with that mobilization and via fight or flight, I would then fall back onto the third line of defense, which would be known as the immobilization response or the freeze response. This is our most primitive system, and it's where we will withdraw, and so we will become not really in the present moment. We've seen it in the animal world where we say they're playing dead, but it's more likely that it is this dorsal vagal response or the immobilization response. Communication will be almost impossible in this state. Running away is very difficult in this state as well, because physiologically it's immobilizing us. The heart slows down a lot. We feel fatigued, and because of the heart slowing down so much, that's where we get that spacey, dissociated feeling as well. So when we look at that red state, it makes sense that when we're in high levels of stress, when people say, well, why didn't they run away? Because we can't. Physiologically, it's not possible if we're in this state. Or why didn't they say something? Again, it's impossible if we're in this state. So physiologically, we need to look at trauma rather than psychologically, like we have a cognitive choice of what's happening. We simply don't. Now, what happens is we can bounce between these different states, or we have blended states. So if I looked at the combination of the yellow and the green state, that would be the biological correlate for play, or being playful, or playing sport. So I could feel the mobilizing energy of that sympathetic nervous system state, but I'm feeling safe because I still have the activation of the vagus nerve. And we see this with mammals. So we see tiger cubs might come together and they play fight, and then they come apart and they look at each other. So it's the social engagement, and then they go ahead and then they fight again. Then they come apart and look at each other. So this is play. But as I said before with the vagal brake, this would be an example of where we're letting the vagal brake off. We let that activation or the mobilizing energy in, then we re-engage the brake. So this is very healthy, and we want to have access to this. Now, the other blend of the states is stillness, where we can combine the red and the green. In this state, it might be when I'm very deep in meditation. It could be when I'm really relaxed, but I have that immobilization response still, where I'm very still, but I have access to the vagus nerve also. So what we're looking at is under threat, we lose access to the green state. But when we're feeling safe, we can have those blended states. Now, what can happen following chronic and traumatic stress is that we lose access to the green state because the vagal brake has been inhibited. And this can mean that we spend most of our time in the yellow, or most of our time in the red, or we oscillate between the two. But as we've talked about, we can bring back in the green state so that we can have these blended states, and we can also spend more time in our social engagement system. So what we're going to do now is our second last practice, which is looking at cultivating that sense of safety. So this is blending the red and the green. The practice that we did before this was blending the yellow. I'll just show you on the picture. The practice we did before, we brought up some stress activation, and then we brought in the vagal brake or the vagus nerve. This time we're going to come into our sense of stillness, and we're going to deliberately bring up a sense of safety so that we can bring in the vagus nerve again. So I just invite you to find a comfortable posture where you can be both alert and relaxed. What we're going to do for this practice is we're going to either bring to mind a person where we feel a sense of deep trust and connection and safety, someone we know that co-regulates us. That could be a pet even. Pets can be wonderful co-regulators. Or it could be a place in nature. So it might be the beach, the forest, somewhere you go and you feel a sense of being deeply held, really connected to nature. And we're going to use that place to help engage our vagus nerve. So picking one, either a person or a place, and remembering it doesn't need to be the perfect one because you can come back and visit it. And you can do this with eyes open or closed, but just a reminder, if the eyes are open, you might like to soften your gaze and look down so your attention can go inside. And just bringing that person to mind. You might see them smiling at you, or bringing the place to mind and imagine that you're there. So just imagining the sounds, the smell, what you can see. And then taking in this experience and what it is that you really love about the person or the place, and savoring that experience. So just paying attention to the feelings that it brings up in your body. Noticing the sensations. Noticing the emotions. See if you could allow that to grow or expand through more parts of your body. And as you take this in and create and feel that sense of trust or connection, or that goodness, just imagine that soaking into your brain and body, registering deeply in your emotional memory. Taking in the good. And then reconnecting back to the image of the person or the place again. So you might see the person smiling at you. Or you might take in the place, noticing what you see, hear, and smell. Taking in what it is that you appreciate about this person or place. And really savoring that experience. So noticing the feelings that it brings up in your body. Noticing the sensations. Noticing the emotions. And allow that feeling to expand through your body. Just letting that sense of goodness and trust and connection soak into your brain and body, registering deeply in emotional memory. Being curious about the baseline of your body now. You might write down on your piece of paper a number from 1 to 10. Noticing the baseline of your mind. You might also record a number from 1 to 10. So just some reflections on that practice. Now, the states that we cultivate in our body can become traits. And we energize the ventral vagal, or the part of the vagus nerve that brings regulation when we do this. And we can also help to change the brain for the better. So remember, we're used to storing memories where we have emotional experiences, but we can plant seeds of goodness as well and feelings of inner security and trust so that our survival brain isn't so sensitized. We're actually making that alarm system less sensitive. We found that savoring is associated with regulating emotions, and focusing on that physical sensation helps that ventral vagal or the social engagement system to come in. And it's been shown that when we do it consistently, it can maintain a positive mood. So we've talked about the autonomic nervous system, but it's made up of the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So this is how we used to look at it. It's just as two branches. So we could think of it like having the sympathetic as the accelerator on a car, and the brake was the parasympathetic. But we know now that it's more complex than that, thanks to the wonderful work of Stephen Porges's work on polyvagal theory. So what we know is, yes, we still have the accelerator of the sympathetic, or what we've looked at today with fight or flight, but what we have with slowing us down is two branches. We have the ventral branch and we have the dorsal vagal branch as well. And these create two very different ways of slowing down our physiology. So the ventral vagus is our social engagement system, and it's tied in with our vagal brake. So this is great. It's covered in myelin. So that's a electrical insulation, if you like, that helps the impulse travel along the nerve quicker and with more accuracy. It's involved in the structures of speech and communication, and the face with the social engagement system. And this is important in our sense of safety. So it provides the necessary neurophysiological requirements for resilience and health regulation. Now, I like to think of this that if we're in the car and the accelerator is the sympathetic, then the ventral vagus is the brake that we use with our foot. So we can slow ourselves down a little bit, we can take it off, we have that finely tuned control. The dorsal vagus has also been known as the dumb vagus. So this is the part of the vagus nerve that doesn't have myelination around it, or it's not fully myelinated. So that means when an impulse travels along it, it's not as accurate, and it sometimes doesn't quite slow us down as we need to. But you may have felt the dorsal vagal if you've tended to faint when you've been really scared, or felt that sense of wobbly legs. So it might be for some people when they give blood or see blood or have a needle, but we get that sense of feeling a bit faint. And sometimes this can happen when we're not in any real danger, but it's an overreaction, or it can be from if we use this in our past when we felt, when we're in a situation that was chronically stressful or traumatic. So we can also use this system if we've spent a long time in our sympathetic state. So let's say we've had something really stressful happen, like a conflict with someone for a couple of days, and then we might crash and come down into that via the dorsal and come down into the state where we feel depressed and flat, and we might not get out of bed for a couple of days. So a healthy nervous system, as I said, is not always calm. We want the vagus nerve to help bring our nervous system into a state of balance. So we need enough energy so that our nervous system is on and we can focus and do our best. If somebody was being aggressive towards us, then we want that fight or flight. We need to run away or to set a very strong boundary with that person. But what that means is that when we've got a healthy vagus nerve, we can put the brakes on to go at the speed that is appropriate for the conditions that we're in. And that's what this is really all about, is that we're not responding like we did in the past when things were stressful. We're physiologically responding to what's happening now. But when we have poor functioning of the vagus nerve, it means that we may get stuck in stressful situations just responding with the sympathetic or with the dumb vagus and coming down into that freeze response. And this is what the dysregulation is. So too much of that sympathetic, being stuck in that state, it might look like tightness through the muscles of the neck and the shoulders or guarding, tension in the legs, so getting ready to run away, tightness in the arms, like we're going to push something, tension in the eyes when we're always on the lookout for danger, insomnia, that felt sense of fear, anger, irritation, or panic. And the gut motility, or the movement of food through our digestive system, slows down because the blood leaves the gut and goes to the areas that it needs for running away or fighting. And this is why we can end up with chronic constipation if we spend a long time in the sympathetic nervous system. We can also end up with chronic inflammation because we don't come back into the state or into the window of tolerance where we know our vagus nerve plays an anti-inflammatory role. Now, we might have too much activation of the dorsal vagal branch, and this is what takes us down underneath that window of tolerance. So at the time, we might feel like we're going to faint, collapse, we may feel frozen. We can feel helpless, hopeless, and depressed. We feel shame, lack motivation, lack energy, chronic fatigue. And our gut actually speeds up when we're in this state. It's thought that it will make us faster at getting away from a predator if we've emptied our bowels because we're slightly lighter. So all of the physiological responses that happen make sense when we understand them through the lens of evolution. But when these chronic states, when we stay in, say, sympathetic or the dorsal vagal state or outside of our window of tolerance, that's how it leads to illness. Now, our stress responses are actually only meant to be about 10 minutes, which would give us time to run away or to fight off something. So let's say you're driving your car, you come around the corner, someone's on your side of the road, fight or flight kicks in. With lightning fast reflexes, you swerve, get out of the way, drive off, and you pull over, your heart's racing, you feel adrenaline. That's a healthy response. It probably just saved your life. But then over time, talking to someone or getting out and walking and discharging some of that stress activation, eventually we come back to the baseline. So that's what we want our nervous system to be able to do. But if we've spent so much time in those states of fight or flight or freeze, it can feel very strange at first to come into this new regulated state. But this, when we do come into spend more time inside of our window of tolerance, our immune system becomes regulated, so does our digestive system, our microbiome does, so does our hormonal system. And we improve many chronic health conditions. Okay, guys, last part. Oh, I'm already over time. I'm sorry. This happens every masterclass, but I will go into the enteric nervous system now, and then we'll go into your questions. So looking at the enteric nervous system, this is the huge plexus of nerves that is inside of our gut. So if we put all of those nerves in your gastrointestinal system into a ball, it would be the size of a cat's brain. So sometimes it's called our second brain or belly brain. And down into that enteric nervous system, we produce and store hormones such as serotonin, which plays a really important role in helping us feel good. So low serotonin is linked to depression. And we also have another neurotransmitter called GABA. And GABA plays a role in helping it's an anti-anxiety neurotransmitter. So it's important to help regulate anxiety. Now, because the vagus nerve penetrates through the gut wall, we know that it's communicating from the gut to our brain. And 80% of the fibers are running up. So the gut has a lot more to say to your brain than the brain has down to your gut. And we know that the feelings in our belly can be really powerful. So we can have that butterflies in our tummy when we're nervous. We can have our gut instinct. We can feel sick to our stomach. We know when something might be right or something might be wrong when we can tune into it. And this is also true with our heart. We can say we're open-hearted, warm-hearted. They enrich our lives and are important to tell us about what's happening. So these sensations and the messages that are running up from the gut to the brain will influence our brain. It'll influence what state of the nervous system we move into, but even the connections up to the brain higher centers to do with thinking as well. So it plays a big role. And what we see is that for a lot of people who have digestive issues, we can engage the vagus nerve deep down in the gut, and this can improve its functioning. Now, when we improve the functioning of the gut, we're actually influencing those 80% of the fibers that run up to the survival brain. Then, if we move inside the window of tolerance from doing that practice, we actually influence those 20% of the fibers that run from the brain down to our gut that regulates our digestion. So this is a way that we can improve our gut microbiome, we can improve those neurotransmitters and hormones, and we can come back into a healthy state of our digestive motility or movement of food through our gut, particularly if we've been suffering from things like irritable bowel syndrome, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or other gut issues. So for this practice, which is our last one, and then we'll move into your questions, we are going to do a practical called VU. Now, VU, the noise that we want to make, is so low that we hear or feel the vibration in our belly. And it's okay if you also feel this in your throat and your chest because you're engaging the vagus, but we want to try and bring it down low, 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 low. So if you imagine a big ship or boat coming home on a cloudy day, sounding its horn, the noise that it makes would sound something like and as I do that, I can feel the vibration running right down from my throat, my chest, and into my belly. So as you practice this, just a few things for you to try. Just see if you can make it a little bit lower with each one. And if you find it hard to connect to your belly, you can place your hands on the belly and practice breathing into that. But sometimes this one just takes a little bit more practice. Now, because we're over time already, we'll try this one for 10 rounds. And you can do this at home where you tune into your interoception of your gut before and after, which is in your video, and that will make a profound difference if you have digestive issues. So if you can find a nice posture for this one, where you can be both alert and relaxed. And you can do this practice with eyes open or closed. And we start with a nice deep breath. Deep breath again. You can place the hands on the belly if it helps. Deep breath in. Just try and imagine you're going lower and lower right throughout that exhalation. We'll try 5 more. See if you can pay attention to vibrations in the belly. Two more, a little bit lower with each one. Last one. And just tuning in to the sensations in the belly if you can. If not, you might just notice the sensations of tingling or pulsing in other areas. So it's a great way to improve interoception of the gut and improve your gut health. Now, you've also got a video tutorial with this practice where you can massage the belly. You can use a yoga ball, or we'll have a link to a Vegas ball, which you can purchase in Australia. But if you're outside of Australia, we'll have a link to what else you can get if you wish to. You can also do this with a blanket if you find that the pressure of the ball in the belly is uncomfortable. So deep pressure on the abdominal area has been shown to improve the vagus nerve, and it will retune the nervous system for up to a couple of days afterwards. So it's a wonderful practice to try. So I'm going to tie everything together for you, because I know that people often now will say, so what practice can I use if I have whatever? Basically, it depends on what state you're in. So if you know you spend more time up into that fight or flight range, the practices that I would suggest for you is the contact points where you soften the feet, or the other contact points where we relaxed. So we down-regulated the nervous system. You could use 1-to-1 breathing or 1-to-2 breathing, because that's going to really powerfully engage the vagal brake, and it will slow the heart down and you'll come back down. You can use name it to tame it, which has been shown to down-regulate the nervous system. So I would suggest that when you're in the sympathetic state, the best thing to do is to use these practices. Now, understanding where you are on the different parts of the window of tolerance takes some practice. So it takes some work to build autonomic awareness. So don't be too hard on yourself when you start out. Now, if you tend to be a person who goes down into freeze or more to shut down, the practices that can help you the most are the dorsal contact points. So where you up-regulate as you pay attention to the contact points. 1-to-1 breathing works better for this than 1-to-2. The practice of VU can be wonderful because you connect to the gut, which is more to do with that dorsal vagal or the dorsal branch of the vagus nerve, and also the felt sense of safety. So you can see that there isn't one practice that works for different situations. It depends on what state you're in, And then it's trying those different practices to see what works. My invitation to you is start with a practice that you use for a week and do it every day for 10 minutes. So you have a little bit of formal practice to get to know it. Now, then when you are outside of your window of tolerance, you have a practice that you know what to do. So let's say you say for the next week after this masterclass, you're going to every morning practice one-to-one breathing for 10 minutes. Next week, you might use Name It to Tame It every day for 10 minutes. The week after, you might do VU. That's your formal practice. Then pick a practice, one for the sympathetic or one for the dorsal, that you're going to try in the heat of the moment. So you might say, okay, when I'm triggered and move into fight or flight, I'm going to use the sympathetic contact points. If it doesn't work, try another one. It needs to attune to your nervous system. So not every practice is going to work every time. And you might say to use, say, the dorsal contact points when you're high up in fight or flight, it's not going to work. So this is where you develop so much resilience if you can learn to these practices, get to know them and know when to use them. So have a try with that. And as you're typing your questions into the Q&A chat box, Tess is getting them ready for us. I just want to remind you that I can't give you medical advice in this format because I haven't done an assessment. So we won't be able to answer questions that are medical questions. If you've asked it with what about for medical advice, please reword it so you can change it. And I'm just going to go through the vagus nerve program because many of you want to join. It's starting on November the 8th. Now, how it works is every Monday, a new module will go live into the members area that's 60 minutes in length. And it's mostly on in the similar format to this, but you can work through it at your own pace. And then later on in the week, we have a 60 to 90 minute call that happens every Thursday or Friday, depending on your, well, actually it'll be every Thursday, depending on your time zone, though that might be different. And through this, we practice the tools together. We have your workbooks that you'll go through, and there's many practices in there to help you and reflective exercises that we go through. And then you can seek feedback and I can also answer your questions. Each person who completes the program then is a member of our alumni. So we have a webinar that follows on from the program so you can catch up. Our scholarships have just closed, but we do have, you will get the price of the masterclass from what you paid for this today off the program, and it's also early bird pricing. So you can save yourself about $99 Australian at this point. All right, we're going to go into our Q&A and I'm going to take us out of, we'll stop the screen share. And Tess is going to read them out.
Okay. So I have got a few that I prepared during it. We've got a quick one, first of all. Are all the practices safe to do during IVF and pregnancy?
So you'd probably want to check about, looking at the ball on the belly wouldn't be ideal. You'd be better off to use something like VU. The rest, it's always best to chat to your own doctor first, but I wouldn't be wanting to use the massage ball on the belly with pregnancy, no.
Beautiful, so just that one. Okay, so we've got another one that says, can just talk about the difference between ventral vagal activation, down regulation in safety, and dorsal vagal activation, down regulation in unsafety. Basically wanting to understand how you tell the difference between those two things.
So ventral vagal activation is going to bring regulation to the nervous system, and it's best to look at this as that traffic light that we looked at. So the green is the ventral vagal or the social engagement system. Now, dorsal vagal activation, if we perceive something as a threat, can take us down into shutdown or freeze. So that was the red color of the traffic light. I would look at that again and review where I spoke about if we have the ventral and the dorsal together as a blended state and we don't perceive anything as a threat, we move into the state of stillness or deep rest. So that's very good for us. It's very restorative for us. So it depends if we're detecting it as a threat or not.
Beautiful. This one comes in quite a bit and has been worded differently by a few people, but again, basically the question is, if your mind and your body are at opposite, which one do you pick? Should they upregulate from their low body or downregulate from their active brain?
Sure, good question. Yes, go with the body. So when you do the contact points, let's say your body is a 9 and your brain is a 2, go with the contact points where you do from the 9 and you're trying to downregulate, and vice versa.
Beautiful. Lauren's asked, she's curious about big emotions and overwhelm. Is that a sympathetic response or sympathetic arousal?
Sure, yeah. It can be either sympathetic, or it can also be where you go down into that underneath the window of tolerance. So say, for instance, anxiety can be, or anger can be part of the sympathetic, and you can feel overwhelmed by that. But what we'd say is that shame and helplessness and hopelessness would more map down to the dorsal vagal, or down to the bottom of that window of tolerance. So it can be for both states.
Beautiful. So we've got a couple about social interactions. One saying, do you have any tips to stop picking up so much from other people if you're a really sensitive nervous system? Yeah. If you have a really sensitive nervous system and you find that other people affect you. And another one just asking, if you can comment on how social interactions influence our nervous state.
Oh, yeah, this is really important because people around us are co-regulating us, whether we are aware of it or not, and it can go in positive ways or negative ways. So there was a recent paper I was reading which was really interesting that looked at couples who they co-regulate. So let's imagine that in the middle of your window of tolerance is a line, and let's say it's Tess and I who work together a lot, and she definitely is a co-regulator for me. So let's say I'm nervous about something and she sits and listens and she stays calm and grounded, and she says, yeah, but that might not go that way. So I've come back down to that line, and we're both there with our emotions and activation. But what's been shown in some couples or some interactions is that they are co-dysregulators. So that could mean that, let's say I am experiencing some activation and the other person picks up on that and says something to me that's antagonizing, then we both might move away towards the edge of that window of tolerance. So that's a really interesting, an interesting way to look at it. Now, I think what we need to look at is we can't influence other people, really. We don't have control over them. We can look at this in terms for ourselves. So some things that I think are really useful is, number one, develop autonomic awareness, so that you can say, if you are around someone who's dysregulated, I'm at my limits of how much more time I can spend with this person. So let's say you go to see somebody who you've got to spend some time with somebody who is very dysregulated, and being around them makes you feel dysregulated. Just to accept that maybe you can't spend hours of time with them, but recognizing in that moment, or recognizing when that moment is very, very important. So autonomic awareness, getting to know where you are in your different states, recognizing, oh, I'm getting quite anxious, I need to take a break, maybe go outside, or maybe this is as much time as I can spend with this person. But the other thing that works well in the heat of the moment is contact points. So from clinical work, I found that what was really useful, because I spent most of my days with people who were experiencing nervous system dysregulation, was I would feel my spine resting back against the chair. And that for me helped me stay connected into my own sense of self, and I could then regulate my own physiology. So there's some things for you to try.
Fantastic, thank you. I just muted myself so you couldn't hear me typing away.
Okay.
So we have a couple of questions about breathing now. Yes. One is that they found it difficult to exhale for a longer count and she starts to feel out of breath. Is there a reason why the longer exhale is difficult? I was going to write it's just practice, but I thought I should throw to you.
Yeah, sure. It can be many reasons. Like it can depend on the state that you're in. So for instance, if I was highly panicked and my breath is because I'm really quite stressed, then it's going to be harder for me to get a longer exhalation out. So there's many reasons why it can be. But one thing I would try, if you found that VU was easier, it technically has a similar effect because the breath out is longer than the breath in. So what I've found is that with patients who didn't like just breathing in and out of their nose with 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 breathing, that VU was better for them. They got a better response.
Got you. So we've also got the question, some breathing techniques also include breath holds on the inhale or exhale. How do breath holds impact vagal tone?
Sure. It's just basically an amplification of what you're already trying to achieve. So when we talked about it before, what we're looking at is actually, it's technically called respiratory sinus arrhythmia, but we're looking at a stretch reflex of your lungs. So if you create that stretch reflex, you'll send a signal up to the brainstem, which will engage the vagal brake more. So you can amplify it more. I would just be aware that if you're in the sympathetic and you take a breath in and hold it, you could actually amplify the stress response more. So I always suggest start with 1-to-1 breathing because it will work for any state. If you were feeling that you were not getting a result with that, then you could try adding in the holds. But there's good, solid research to show how well that 1-to-1 breathing works. So that's what I'd start with.
Fantastic. Just one more quick question about breathing. Is the 4-7-8 breathing, which I'm guessing is for holding it out for 7, is that classed as 1-to-2 breathing?
4-7-8. So it's in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. Not really, because you've got a hold there. So that will change it.
Okay. There's a question about, do you have any suggestions for leg posture if you're sitting on the floor? Does it matter?
Leg posture, was that question?
Yeah. Yes.
If you're sitting on the floor, it's obviously harder to do the contact points with the feet, but you still can use the sit bones for sure. I would just prop a cushion underneath the sit bone so that the pelvis was higher than the knees slightly, because what that will do is lengthen the spine. Like if you just wanted to even try this now, if you can think of rolling the pelvis slightly so that you really sit on top of the sit bones, press your feet into the ground softly and get a sense of length through the spine, and then relax the shoulders. That's a wonderful way to come into a position where you're both alert and relaxed. So it's really bringing you closer towards that 5. But yeah, just prop something underneath the sit bones.
Fantastic. Sorry, Zach has asked, when you talk about vagal tone, what physically are you referring to? Is it the stretching of the vagus nerve?
Sure. Great question. The technical term is cardiac vagal tone, and that's measured when we look at the beats of the heart and the influence that the vagus nerve has on it. So if you go back and have a look at heart rate variability, it's to do with the engagement of the vagus coming in. So we say that when it is having that role of bringing the brake in, we have higher vagal tone. And there is a actual recording of it that can be done as well.
Fantastic. Nina's asking, what is burnout? What's happening when we burn out in relation to the vagus nerve?
Sure. So burnout would relate to being in the state that was at the bottom of the window of tolerance. So it's more to do with, I would call it dysregulated for hypoarousal, like right down the bottom. And what it means is that we often can fatigue that sympathetic activation. So let's say we've been in high periods of stress and then we crash down. So I've actually got a video coming up on this soon, but the main parts of it are feeling emotionally exhausted. And what was once said that it was, oh, it's depression, it's actually showing that it's a physiological response, which is spending so much time down in that hypoarousal state that we feel fatigue, emotional exhaustion. And I think the other main classification from the study that I can remember was that we couldn't be as productive as we normally would.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've got a question here about, you've mentioned that children can't self-regulate, so look to adults for their regulation. At what age are they able to self-regulate, and should you promote self-regulation?
Sure. So I think we should frame that just a little bit differently, to say that at all stages of our lives, we need co-regulation. So even if I am amazing at self-regulation, I will always long for co-regulation or need co-regulation. It's part of being human, to do with the social engagement system. So there wouldn't really be a point that a child would stop needing co-regulation, but we're looking at seeing, so a baby is born, and we talked about the ventral branch of the vagus nerve not being fully myelinated. So what happens is, over time, and with that co-regulation from birth, we do see more myelination. Starting to bring in tools of self-regulation, we could probably say around about 4, things like that. But you could start with even the noticing this happening, noticing sensations. So, yeah.
All right. Well, it looks like we only have time for maybe a couple more. So if you've just sent your question through now and it hasn't been answered, it's probably because one of two things: somebody else had already asked a similar version, so just go back and listen to the recording. And also it could be because you're going to get some resources sent through after this with the recording that might give you more information. So a few people asked for some clarification about contact points. Those audio resources will really help you with that. So yeah, just to explain that. But we've got a couple of questions relating to hearing. So what's the relationship between the vagus nerve and hearing? And also if you have any tips on reducing noise sensitivity or improving vagal tone to reduce noise sensitivity.
Okay, great. So we spoke about this when we looked at the social engagement system and the traffic light slide. And we said that in the social engagement system, we detect the sound of like mid-frequency sounds or the sound of the human voice. But as we move into other states, those muscles change, and so we don't hear mid-frequency sounds as well. Now, this isn't the same as being deaf. This is that what we're taking in through these filters changes. So the best way to do this, excuse me, is through the social engagement system, if we can activate that. But there's some really good research as well to show music can be helpful. Just 1 second, sorry. As a portal to help coming into that social engagement system. So regulation of our nervous system can really help to improve that if we know that we're having an effect with, regulation via the social engagement system is what works really well. So spending time with someone where there's reciprocity, where there's give and take, somebody who's helps us to come into that state of feeling calm and at ease. And that might mean we need to work with somebody such as a therapist if we haven't got someone that we can think of, but it can come from a pet. In the meantime, it can be helpful if noise is a trigger or it tends to noise sensitivity, tends to come from, spending too much time outside your window, that you can look at the headphones that work. But hyperacusis, there's some interesting research on that too, but social engagement systems are a very important one.
Beautiful. Well, like I say, there are still a few more that we haven't got to yet, but I think that a lot of them will be covered, as I said, with the recording. And the other one, actually, there were a couple of questions about the VU practice.
Okay.
It might have actually just been the recording, but when you did the VU practice, I think just because you were doing it quickly, you did quite short VUs, and people are asking, it felt more natural to carry the VU for the whole breath. And is that still the same practice?
Sure. I mean, you can change that to what attunes to your system. Some people might find starting with 1-to-1 is helpful, but some people might find 1-to-2, where the VU is twice as long as the inhalation, is helpful. If you've trained in chanting and use things like the mantra Om, you might like to go for longer because it feels natural. But what I would say is go with what attunes to your nervous system. We're all so different. So yeah, have a try that.
Beautiful. Oh, actually, sorry, one more, because it got asked a couple of times, and then we'll wrap up. Okay. But can you comment on fawn as is that something you can answer quickly? Yeah.
Fawn is very complicated, but I will do my best to answer in this situation. Like, it's a short time, obviously, but I'll go into saying that fawn isn't necessarily a state on its own. So we would look at the fawn response as being a blend. Now, basically what happens is in fawn, we manage to, and this only happens in very more rare cases where it's been shown with people who were who've been held against their will. So we don't see fawn as an everyday response, and it's not the same as being compliant. So, if my boss asks me to do something at work that I don't really want to do, we wouldn't say that it's a fawn response for me to say, yes, okay, I'll do that, even if I don't really want to do that. With fawn, we actually use our social engagement system to become a co-regulator for somebody who is a threat to us. And so it's appeasement. And I would say that's a blended state of where we're dissociated from our body, and we're using our own social engagement system to be able to survive by appeasing somebody who is very much a threat to us. So that's why it's not seen that often. I just want to make clear it's not the same as people pleasing. So it is a physiological response when we feel like we are very much under threat, but it's not a state on its own. It's a blended response with our social engagement system and dissociating from the body. And if we had more time, there's a lot more to unpack on that. But that's enough to go with for now.
Beautiful. Thanks. Well, I think that's all we have time for. So as I say, everybody will get an email that has some more information. Yeah.
Thank you, Tess. I just want to take this time to thank everybody profoundly who has stayed all this time. It was meant to be 2 hours, and we are now 2 hours and nearly 40 minutes in. I try my best to stay on time, but I get so excited about talking about this, and especially knowing how enthusiastic you all are. So thank you so, so much for being here, your presence, your questions, your enthusiasm. We love to see you practicing. We love to hear about it. So if you feel like sharing in your stories on Instagram about how you're practicing, please feel free to post in your stories and tag us in that. It's great when we get to engage together as a community and see that. And once again, I just really, really sincerely want to thank you for being here. It's been a wonderful class, and Your ability to stay this long is very inspiring to me. So thank you. And you'll receive your resources shortly. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.